All right, hello and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be talking about the idea of if I truly love myself, if I learn to fully love and accept myself, why would I still need the love of others? If I learn to be on my own side, if I learn to be on my own safe space, if I learn to problem solve, if I learn how to get all my own needs met, what is the point of relationships? And the other kind of way of framing what I want to talk about today is this concept of moving out of the binaries of codependency and independence into interdependence. Because I think that that's really the question we're asking when we say, like, if I'm supposed to love myself, what does this mean for relationships, and what does it mean to be in a healthy relationship and all this stuff? I think what we're really saying is, like, what does a healthy relationship actually look like? What does a relationship not based on needs, or not based on either being codependent with one another or trying to be ultra independent, what does that look like? And I want to talk about this from the perspective of the self-love journey, because I believe, and I have experienced, that the self-love journey can really help us figure out how to navigate healthy relationships in ways that make them less confusing and more approachable. So the first thing that I want to say about relationships is that I have experienced in my own life, and I know that a lot of people experience, this feeling of looking for the rules, right? Like we're just looking for, like, how do I have a healthy relationship? What is the best way to be in a relationship? And what are the guidelines that I can just follow all the time so that I know that I'm doing life right and I'm having healthy relationships? And also, what do I do about these very real social needs and these connection needs that don't go away no matter how much I learn to love myself, right? And that is what I want to talk about today, is that first things first, I feel like a lot of us in this world err towards trying to be really independent in order to kind of protect ourselves in relationships, or to try to manage our relationships in a way that we think is going to be helpful and that we think that will make things good. We look to be completely self-sovereign, completely self-sufficient, only relying on ourselves as a way of many things, right? Trying to be responsible, trying to be on top of ourselves, trying to take responsibility for ourselves, which are all very healthy things. And then also there can be elements of that of just not wanting to be hurt and not wanting to be let down, and having been hurt and let down and having our trust broken, and maybe having abuse or trauma in the past that have made us say, like, relationships just aren't a safe place, needing other people isn't safe for me, and I'm gonna learn to just be on my own. And then we can sort of take the self-love journey from that vantage point and turn it into a thing of, like, trying to be, like, so self-sufficient and so self-aware and so independent that we say, like, literally, if I'm doing my self-love journey right, other people's emotions and other people's actions and other people's capacity to meet my needs or not meet my needs doesn't affect me at all. That it's my feelings and my feeling good and feeling satisfied and getting my needs met in this life is all up to me, and it's never an outside person's job to do any of these things for me. And if I'm upset by something that someone in the outside is doing, I either just need to change my own behavior or my own thoughts, or accept them for how they are. And we can kind of err on that side and make it really, like I say, trying to be ultra independent as a kind of way of self-protection. Or it can be something that becomes a new way of being codependent. Or we can turn it into a kind of superstition. Like, we can turn it into this, if I love myself enough, if I take care of myself enough, if I have enough self-awareness and self-knowledge, then eventually I'll get to a place where no one treats me badly ever again, and where people understand me, and I find my people, and I find the people who are going to love me, and I'll find this perfect balance, and I'll find these perfect people who will just learn how I am and how to love me and all these things because I'm loving myself enough. And both of those are kind of, like I say, an extreme ends of the binary that a lot of us fall into when it comes to our relationships. And the second thing that I want to say about relationships and the looking for the binary and the kind of seeing ourselves be on one side or the other, like if I just fix myself enough and love myself enough and take care of myself enough and do this self-love path right, it will change people, and they will learn how to love me, and I will be deserving of love, and they will take care of me, and the people who are bad to me now will just change, and all of this, that kind of codependence, right? If I just do all this magical work on the inside, it will magically change the outside to what I want it to be. Or the independence. Self-love means that I'm fully self-sufficient and I'm fully taking care of myself, and everything that I feel is my responsibility, and everything that I want is my responsibility, and anything that happens in my relationship that I don't like or whatever, that's on me, and I just need to be like completely self-sufficient. The reason that we fall into those binaries is, one, for most of us, we're repeating the patterns that we were modeled. Because how many of us can say that we grew up witnessing healthy relationships? Most of us don't really even know what a healthy relationship would look like because we've never seen one. Allie, this is so important. So grateful for you for sharing up and sharing about this right now. Yeah, no, I think that, again, like this is one of the biggest things, is that this is one of the biggest things that I'm seeing in the spirituality and self-help movement especially, is there's a lot of movement towards the kind of like polarity doctrine, and that if you just polarize yourself enough, you will find these perfect, healthy, balanced relationships. And then I'm also seeing a lot of the ultra independence, that the solution to all of our problems and the solution to all of our pain, especially in relationships, is to just become as self-sufficient and independent and on our own and taking as much personal responsibility as possible. And that anything that hurts and that anything that goes wrong is like a lack of you taking responsibility. And there are elements of these things that are absolutely true, right? Like we know that there's a reality to the polarity masculine feminine dynamic. But again, I think that we can't simplify it down to like vagina, feminine, penis, masculine. Here's how you role play in order to have a good relationship, because that is dramatically oversimplifying the human experience of relationship, the human experience of how we perceive ourselves and how we feel with these energies at any specific time and on any specific day, and to try to find healthy relationships in this kind of, again, I don't want to try to find healthy relationships by saying this is how to play the role so that you will have a healthy relationship, which I know that's not always what it is, and I know that that is also an oversimplification of the polarity teachings. But generally speaking, from my experience, us trying to fit ourselves into some sort of mold and thinking that that's going to help us feel connected in our relationships doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because the more you're not being just who you are in a relationship, the less connected you're going to feel. So we might be able to like role play and create this polarity, but is that a genuine connection? And then what happens when you can't play the role anymore? What happens when your real feelings come out, or your real personality comes out, or your real, how you balance masculine and feminine within yourself comes out? That's, I think, just part of the problem with it. And then again, the ultra independence, everything is just up to us, that is also true to a degree, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. Like, as we become more self-loving, we are going to get to a point where we start to see, like, okay, it is not up to the people I'm in relationship with to predict me and to read my mind and to know what I want and what I need, and that being an expression of love. Rather, it's up to me to start to understand my own emotions, to understand my own wants, to understand my own needs, to understand my own desires, and to learn how to communicate that effectively. It's up to me to respect that this other person exists outside of me and has their own wants and their own desires and their own feelings and their own perspectives and their own ways of being. And to be in a relationship with somebody is not just how do I figure out how to make it so that you meet my needs. And it's not just how to figure out how do I meet their needs. It's being in a relationship with someone, especially romantic relationships or friendships and even family relationships. It's much deeper than that. We're doing this journey of life with another person or with other people. And that is far more complex than just how do I scratch your back while you scratch mine, and how do I get it so that you read my mind, yeah? And so, again, this personal responsibility for how we feel and what we want and what we're expecting and what speaks love to us, what kind of life we want to be living, what kind of things we need, what kind of things we don't like having, all of that, we do need to take personal responsibility for that. And we also need to take personal responsibility for the things that other people do that bothers us, that harms us, that does not work for us. And sometimes the answer isn't just learn to be okay with it or blame yourself. But the answer is really, we need to have a conversation about this. This behavior doesn't work for me, and this is what I'm saying. All this is to say that there's no one way to have a healthy relationship. There's no one answer or one formula for everyone at any time for how to have a healthy relationship. And I think that this is why we have such a hard time with it, because it's one of these things that we have to continually show up and learn something new and have new skills, and then continually show up and use our old skills to navigate a living, breathing, always going to be changing reality of a relationship. Yeah? That part of this self-love journey helps us to understand that we're not going to reach a heaven, in the sense, like, while we're here in these physical bodies on earth, in the sense of there's no ultimate place we're going to get and then we can just coast there. And relationships are no different. No one relationship is ever going to be, we figured it out, here are the rules, here's the dynamic, and now this is how it is. Because a relationship is between two or more people who are always going to be changing. You are always going to be changing, the people you're relating to are always going to be changing. So there's no, this is how it is, and then now you can kind of autopilot. You're always going to be learning something about yourself. You're always going to be learning about something about someone else. The needs are going to be shifting. The desires are going to be shifting. What does and doesn't work is going to shift. And as we come on this self-love path, what we're really doing, a big part of what we're doing, is learning how to draw ourselves into the moment that actually exists, so we can show up for the people that actually exist, right? This is a huge theme that I talk about when I'm talking just about our individual self-love journey, is that self-love is about learning how to show up for the you that actually exists right here, right now, as you actually exist, not as the version of yourself you want yourself to be, not as the version of yourself you wish you were, not as the version of yourself you think you are, and the needs you think you have, and what you should or shouldn't be wanting or needing or having, but the you that actually exists right here, right now, with all the pain and all the confusion and all the wants and needs and everything that you have in this moment, and then saying, how can I best show up for the me that exists right now? And that is the same thing, the same mindset we take into our relationships. It's, how do I best show up for the relationship that actually exists right now, with the person that I'm with who actually exists right now? Third big thing to understand about relationships is that our connection needs and our need for community and community interaction and love from other people and approval from other people, I want us to think of it like our need for hydration, okay? And then our self-love need, our need to learn how to validate ourselves, how to approve of ourselves, how to show up for ourselves, how to understand ourselves, how to communicate effectively, all of these things are like a need for, are like our hunger need. Yeah? So these two needs play into each other. There's a lot of overlap between our hunger and our thirst, our hunger and our hydration needs. Sometimes our food can provide hydration. Sometimes our hydration can provide calories and nutrients and things that our food would usually provide. Sometimes when we don't have access to hydration, we can use tools like really juicy food to help meet those needs in some ways. When we don't have access to food, we can use calorie-rich, nutrient-rich beverages to help support us. But ultimately, the need for hunger and the needs of hunger and the need of hydration are two different needs. Yes? And ideally, we have an ideal balance of both. And I think if we can start to look at our relationships like a thirst, like our need for hydration, and our self-love path, like our need for food, it can start to make a little bit more sense why we're not going to love ourselves enough that eventually we don't need other people anymore. We're never going to be able to figure out nutrition to a degree that we never need to drink water ever again. Okay, so like I said, there are ways in which when water isn't available and when we can't get it, food can be a way that we support ourselves for a while. But ultimately, you can't erase our need for hydration. And these two needs are different needs. So again, if we can start to understand that our self-love path is not about trying to make ourselves completely independent, completely needless, completely unattached to the love and the acceptance and the approval of anyone or anything outside of ourselves, we can take this pressure off of ourselves to think that that's what we're supposed to be doing. Okay. And even just practically, like down to like just a pragmatic, practical level, we don't survive as individuals. As much as technology and advances in the ways that we live have moved us to the point where it can really feel like we're living a life of no other human connection sometimes, we have to understand that the technologies that we're interacting with, the systems that we're working within, everything that we partake in as a human race is due to the collective. It's because of the collective that we even have these technologies that allow us to be independent, right? Nobody is a self-made person. Nobody is completely ultra independent. We are all depending on the food system, we're all depending on the power system, we're all depending on the transportation system, we're all depending on the knowledge and the understanding and the wisdom and the systems built by those who came before us. None of us are ever going to know everything, right? If you get into an accident, you're not going to spend some time like Googling how to sew up your own wound. You're going to go to the doctor. And we need to understand that independence in this reality as a human being does not exist because it's too complicated. Reality, survival, trying to thrive, we can't do that alone. And we never are doing it alone. We can't do that alone in the sense of like, you would have to try really, really, really hard. You would have to take an exerted effort to completely outcast yourself from society and from being able to take advantage of at least some things within society. You would have to try really, 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 really hard to have a life where you are actually completely alone, in the sense that there's no system of support at all around you, okay? And if we can start to like understand that, we can understand that like, yeah, no, the point of self-love and the point of life and the point of everything isn't, like I say, to become ultra independent. And then the second thing, right, with our emotional needs, and on a less practical level and on a more feeling, emotional level. Again, we would never want to be completely independent. We would never want to be in a situation where the only perspective that exists is our own perspective. Because no matter how much work we do and awareness work we do and trying to connect with reality work that we do, our perception is always going to be filtered and limited. And that is always going to have an effect on the outcomes we have in this life. And having access to the perspective of others is always a beneficial thing. Having access to the perspective and the outlook and the information and the understanding of those that live on this earth with us, is always going to be beneficial. And then last thing, right, the emotional needs and the emotional connection needs. This again is a complex web of human understanding, right? Like I really believe that our need for interaction and love and conversation and stimulation and all of these things goes beyond just getting our physical needs met and feeling like we're safe around others. And I think that is a big part of it. We know from experience that being connected to other people feels good and helps us get our needs met. We understand that we can help other people get their needs met. We understand, again, that this creating a life where we can survive and where we can thrive requires connection. But even on top of that, like conversation, laughing, cuddling, snuggling, all of these things that don't necessarily meet a physical need, it's still a part of our biology and our wiring as social creatures. So my big first point is that self-love is not a path where we're trying to get rid of that. We are not trying to get rid of the parts of ourselves that want and need and desire connection with others, either to get our needs met or for beyond that, okay? That's not the point of this. However, I do want to acknowledge that in real reality, sometimes we don't have access to the people and the connections and the circumstances that we would want to have in order to feel the way that we want to feel. Sometimes we don't have access to the people who can help keep us safe. Sometimes we don't have access to someone being a cheerleader for us when we need them. We have to be pragmatic on this path and say that when we can be in healthy relationship with people who love and care about us and who help us meet our needs and we help them meet their needs and we have this healthy or healthy enough dynamic, when we have access to that, absolutely have that. Indulge in that. Learn how to create healthy habits within that. Use your self-love path as a way of supporting that. Yes? And when we don't have access to that, when we find ourselves in situations where we're not around people who understand us, where we're not around people who can help us meet our own needs, where we're not around people who can validate us, and we're not around the love and the connection and the support that we would desire, we use our self-love path to support us in that reality. Do you see what I'm saying here? The self-love path is about supporting ourselves the best we can in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. It's not about saying that one type of circumstance is the right type of circumstance and one type of circumstance is the wrong type of circumstance. It's not saying if you have a lot of relationships and a lot of people around you that that's wrong because you should be becoming more and more independent. And it's not about saying that if you don't have connection and you don't have people around you, well, too bad, you're out of luck. You just have to sit there and feel awful until connection happens. We want to say, on this self-love path, how do I show up for the me that actually exists in the circumstances that actually exist in my life so that I can best support myself within that? because both of these things have their benefits and their negatives. Okay? So when we're looking in the context of relating to one another, there are going to be benefits to being in close relationship with other people. That connection, that understanding, that validation, that need getting met, that feeling like we're not alone, the feeling like we have people to help support us, the alternate perspectives, all of that great stuff exists within that. And there are going to be challenges within those relationships. Challenges with understanding what we want versus what other people want. Challenges with communication. Challenges with learning how to be our full selves within a relationship without overtaking other people while still, maintaining healthy boundaries. Learning how to be interdependent is complicated. And I think if we can just start to acknowledge that, a lot of us will feel a lot less crazy in the fact that we find relationships really difficult. We find them difficult because they are difficult. We find it difficult to be in relationship because being in relationships are difficult. They are complex, they are always changing, they are always growing. Our understanding of ourselves and other people and what we want and what we need in the world and all of these things is constantly changing. So to understand that as we build our self-love and as we learn how to show up for ourselves, we're also going to be interacting with the challenges that come with being in relationship and having to navigate getting your needs met and my needs met and what works for you and what works for me and all of these things. When we're more in a state of having less connection and less people around us and less validation, that there are benefits to that. That's where we can really learn who and what we are. That's where we can start to really tune into what we feel and what we want and have less distraction and less feeling like we're responsible to and for others. That's where we can really start to question our conditioning and the things that we do on a daily basis and that we believe about ourselves that maybe aren't true and that don't actually serve the highest good and highest function. I know that a lot of people who identify as having gone on any kind of spiritual journey, there's always the wilderness. There's almost always the period of time where the person went out on their own. And this is true in adulting ceremonies all throughout indigenous cultures. This idea that we need to disconnect sometimes, often, from the continual feedback of consensus reality from our friends and family and the culture and the understandings and the ways of being that we were fed and that we're constantly being fed as this is how reality works and this is how you need to be and this is all, in order to find deeper layers of truth sometimes. And so there's massive benefit in learning that. There's massive benefit in learning how to be your own safe place. There's massive benefit in learning how to understand your own needs and how to get them met without needing other people to approve of you for you to get those needs met. And so when we have these periods of time, which I think all of us at some point are going to find ourselves without the connection and without the community that we would want, learning to get on our own sides, learning to validate ourselves, learning to care for ourselves in ways that we didn't know that we could, to the best of our ability and to the best of our degree, without ever shaming or blaming ourselves for not being able to or not having access or this not necessarily being the most practical thing at all times. We understand that is incredibly beneficial. And then we also have to deal with the challenges that come with being not in connection the way that we want to be in connection. We have to deal with the challenges of being independent and not having help, not having support, not having validation, not having someone to help you break out of your perspective sometimes. All of these things are a part of it. That fear of being alone and being isolated, what that means about you and what that's going to mean about your future and all of these things, it's going to come up. So there's no perfect situation, and there's no perfect circumstance, and there's no easy situation, and there's no easy circumstance in terms of overarching how do we get our needs met, how do we live a satisfactory life. And again, understanding that our lives are going to come in waves. There are going to be periods of time where you have lots of interaction. There are going to be periods of time where you're more isolated. There's going to be periods of time where you're really focusing on a couple very specific relationships. There are going to be periods of time when you expand out and you're more surface level with way more people. This is all a part of life. This is all a part of reality. And we don't want to get into a situation where we're trying to look for what the right circumstances are. We want to look at what are the circumstances that exist, what do I find beneficial about those circumstances, and where can I support myself in the things that I find challenging within those circumstances. And then again, from there, how do I build more awareness of the kinds of circumstances that work best for me? And then how do I build those circumstances into my life to the best of my ability? That's what the self-love path is about. So all of this is to say, the self-love path is not about becoming ultra-independent. The self-love path is not about, if you love yourself enough, you will never need someone else again. The self-love path says, the more you can show up for yourself, the more you can understand what you want and what you need, the more you can be in communication with yourself and learn to really become aware of what you want and what you need and what is bothering you and what's going on for you, and the more you learn to communicate that clearly to yourself, the better you're going to have, the better time you're going to have in relationships. Yeah? Because you can use all of those skills and all of those tools to help you navigate your relationships, where you are interacting with another person, other people who are not you, who do not see the world the way that you see the world, who were not brought up the way that you were brought up, who don't have the same perspectives and understandings and ideas and skills as you, that you have to work with to get everyone's needs met. Our self-love path helps us learn interdependence. Our self-love path helps us learn the very complex and messy reality of interdependence, where we are not trying to fully take complete responsibility for ourselves, and we are not trying to just become whatever we need to become so that we will be loved and approved of by someone outside of ourselves. Because love and approval from someone outside of ourselves is always going to be a part of this reality. But it is not a love that we can guarantee and that we can always count on. The love of someone else is always going to be a thing that we want. It's always going to be a part of what feels good for us as human beings. And it is something we do not have control over. It is something we do not have control over. We can bend ourselves into all sort of shapes and twist ourselves all around and do all of these things in order to be approved of. And again, sometimes we're in situations where in order to keep ourselves safe, we do have to do that. Sometimes codependence is the best way to not get yourself abused or abandoned in some really catastrophic way. And to that I say again, that goes beyond the scope of this work. When we're in a truly abusive situation, when we're in a truly unsafe space, that is a separate reality from we're in just kind of a shitty relationship. And again, I think that a lot of relationship coaches and just teachings on relationships, we don't differentiate between these two things enough. And we can make it sound like people who are in codependent, abusive relationships are there because they're making bad choices and they could leave if they want to and all of these things without understanding the complexity of that. And this can sound really victim blamey. And that's why I'm saying this is not what I'm talking about. When we're in truly unsafe situations, that is a separate situation that requires separate understanding that I am not going to be speaking to in this video. Okay? What I'm talking about is all of us having some form of unhealthy attachment to the love and approval of other people, in the sense that we could lose that love and approval, we could upset people, we could be our true selves and have people leave and be upset and whatever, and it's not catastrophic to our life. We could figure out a way of being okay. We can figure out a way of supporting ourselves and getting our own needs met and having a healthier dynamic within our own life, and that being true. That's what I'm talking about. The more we learn to love and accept ourselves, the more we're going to understand and be able to clearly identify unhealthy relationship dynamics where we are playing a role to get love and approval that asks us to sacrifice ourselves, that asks us to participate in dynamics and ways of being that do not nourish us. Okay, like that's kind of my loose definition of a codependent relationship. It's where you're doing some things that are kind of out of alignment for you, and I'm doing some things that are kind of out of alignment for me, and both of us are kind of in this state of shitty dynamic, but we're kind of generally getting our needs met, and this is what's comfortable to us and our nervous systems. And so we're both kind of feeding into each other's bad habits. And again, bad habits that we learned, bad habits that were modeled to us, habits where we currently don't know any other better way. That's what codependence is. I'm going to sacrifice myself and you're going to sacrifice yourself, and we're both going to do it so that the other person stays and that the benefits of that staying get to keep happening. I didn't say that eloquently at all. I'm going to sacrifice myself and you're going to sacrifice yourself in order that we both keep each other around to do the things that we do for each other. That's a codependent relationship, right? And so the more we become self-loving, in the sense that we start to show up for who and what we actually are right here, right now, the more we start to tune into our emotions, the more we start to tune into the outcomes of our actions, the more we start to tune into the outcomes of the things that we say and the things that we do, the more we're going to become aware of these compromises we're making. And again, the more we're going to have to decide for ourselves what compromises are worth it and what compromises aren't. Because again, we are all adults listening to this, generally speaking. We're coming into adulthood, or we are adults. And what that means is that no one can tell you what kind of relationship you should be having. No one can tell you that, hey, you have this codependency and you have these bad habits and you should be working on it. You are an adult who gets to decide if something is not worth it for you right now, or if something is not worth it for you ever. This is another one of those realities of being alive and being in human relationships that I think a lot of self-help gurus don't speak to, which is that perfection is never going to exist. Perfection would be incredibly challenging to create. There's always going to be some element of like shittiness or stuckness or not completely ideal circumstance in everything. All the time. You're not failing in life if you're not living on a bed of roses. If your relationship isn't the most polarized, amazing, sexually charged, flowing, you totally understand each other at all times and everyone's needs are getting met and you're just vibrating at 100 all the time. You're not failing if you don't have that. You're a human if you don't have that. You're here like the rest of us. Yeah? And part of understanding that, part of our self-love journey is going to be realizing where we do and do not have the bandwidth to deal with something, where we do and do not have the desire to deal with something, either now or ever, and where the effort to create something healthier is and isn't worth it to us. So that's another big thing about the self-love path, is that sometimes people are like, isn't self-love kind of letting yourself off the hook? And the answer is sometimes. Sometimes we let ourselves off the hook, in the sense of the reality is we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the energy, we don't have the resources to actually make something better in our lives right now. And therefore, not letting ourselves off the hook is really just saying, I'm just going to continually internally beat myself up about this thing that I don't actually have the resources to fix. Sometimes on the self-love path, we say, yeah, this isn't ideal. This totally, I can see that this isn't the healthiest thing. This isn't the most ideal, transcended, self-fulfilled perfection dynamic. And it's the best I can do right now. It's the best I'm willing to do right now. And you as an adult get to decide what you want to work on, what you want to put your energy towards, what you want to fix and change and make better, and what you're like, you know what? This is fine. This is good enough for right now. In the sense of, this is all I have the bandwidth for. I don't actually have the skills or ability or the energy to change this. Or you say, I could change it. Yeah, like I could put in the effort. I could try. I could apply these tools. And the answer is, I just really don't want to right now. I don't have the energy, I don't have the desire, I don't care enough. And that is okay. Sometimes on the self-love path, we learn where we need to just stop beating ourselves up about a thing that we literally either cannot change or we just don't have the desire to change. And we make that okay, and we make that safe. That's a huge part of this path, is realizing that this constantly seeking perfection, this constantly seeking for this transcended state, it's just capitalism. That's not actual self-love, that's not actual self-growth. Where we have the energy and where we have the desire and where we have the real resources to make our lives better, that's where we want to focus on that stuff. When we're in a situation where we don't have the resources, we don't have the energy, and we do not have the desire to make something better for ourselves, we need to make that okay. Because otherwise, we're not going to make ourselves fix it by continually beating ourselves up about that. Contrary to popular belief, the more you just beat yourself up about something that you don't have the resources, don't have the energy, or don't have the desire to change, all that you're really doing is creating a situation where you're beating yourself up. Because you're not going to get the resources, the desire, or the energy simply by continually telling yourself you should be on this thing. Rather, you give yourself the capacity to just say, I'm not going to deal with this right now. And then either the energy, the resources, or the desire will come up and you will deal with it. Or you will realize, I want to spend my energy somewhere else. Because life is big, and life is complex, and life asks a lot of us. And to think that we're ever going to be able to completely, perfectly manage all areas of our lives at all times forever, in all of the different circumstances that are going to come up, isn't reality. Self-love helps you to understand where you want to deal with the things that need to be dealt with and where you don't. So that's another big thing about codependency, is that we all have it. We all have elements where we're compromising ourselves and we're not being our real true self and we're not being honest and all of these things. And unless and until it gets to a point where you really want to deal with it, you're probably not going to, and that is okay. Okay? And then, like I say, the more we're on this self-love path and the more we're making room for ourselves to just be who we are right now, to have the resources that we have right now, to have the desire and the energy that we have right now, and to make those things okay, if there is room for us to change, if there is room for us to make things better, that's where it's going to come from. The more we make it okay, the more we make ourselves safe, the more we show up for ourselves for who and what we are right here, right now. where we can make our relationships actually better, that's where that motivation is going to come from. The more you love and accept and validate yourself, the more you're going to be able to stand up for yourself where you need to stand up for yourself, the more you're going to be able to communicate what you need to communicate. And like I say, the more you're going to be able to learn how to communicate. Because again, a lot of us have a hard time communicating in relationships because we're triggered and we're feeling attacked and we're feeling scared and we don't really know what we want or what we need or what's wrong or what kind of reaction we want. We're expecting ourselves from the other person. We're expecting our caregivers from the other person. Like, there's often so much going on in a situation where we're in that codependence, where we have these behaviors, repetitive behaviors over and over and over again of it being funky, is that, again, we need to understand that that's going to be something that needs to be worked through over time. There's probably not going to be an answer that fixes that. Rather, we're going to keep showing up for ourselves. We're going to keep asking, okay, well, what hurt about that? What didn't feel good about that? How did it go when I communicated it that way? If I could get on my own side and make myself feel even just like a little bit safe, could I change my communication to be less combative and less attacking and less attacking to protect myself and more understanding of the other person's perspective? Where is understanding the other person's perspective actually getting me into trouble and it's making me not take the action to protect myself and help myself where I need to? That's what self-love helps us do, right? Self-love helps us to get clearer on what we're feeling, on what we're wanting, on what we're needing, on how we're communicating, and where these things are and are not working, so we can bring that into our relationships. Yes? Self-love helps us to be on our own side, to be our own safe place, to have that unconditional love that is never going to be available from anyone outside of ourselves. So to wrap that point up, the love of others is always going to be something we want and need and crave. And it's always going to be something we never have control over. Always and never. We are never going to have perfect control over it. It's always going to be vulnerable, I think, is the other way of saying it. To love, to let yourself love someone, to let yourself need someone, to need someone even if you don't want to, it's incredibly vulnerable. And it's incredibly uncomfortable for us to be vulnerable. And we need to understand that. Relationships are always going to be. They are always going to contain a level of vulnerability. Where we have control over love, where we have control over approval, where we have control over gentleness when we're in a state, over kindness towards ourselves, over being curious and compassionate versus combative or invalidating or whatever it is, where we have complete control over that is only with ourselves. We can never expect anyone else to perfectly love us. We can never expect anyone else to be perfect supports for us. And this is, again, something that self-love is really going to do for us. Every person we are ever in a relationship with is always going to be imperfect. Every person, every therapist, every lover, every friend, every family member, every teacher, every guru, they are going to have their fallibility. They are going to have their blind spots. They are going to have their times and their places where they cannot love you. They cannot love you the way that you need to be loved, or they cannot love you at all. And this is a reality of human relationships. There is no perfect external love. And there's no way of turning off our desire for external love, and there's no way of protecting ourselves from all hurt and the letdown of being loved by somebody imperfectly. Rather, self-love helps us to know that there is always love available, even when that external love isn't there. Self-love helps us to trust ourselves when the people around us fail us. Self-love helps us navigate what is true and what feels good about what these people are saying, and what is not true and what does not feel good about what these people are saying. A huge part of self-love is supporting ourselves in no longer looking for that perfect authority figure, that perfect person, that perfect guru, that perfect lover that we are never going to find. A lot of us are spending our entire lives trying to manipulate ourselves into something that we think will make us worthy of that perfect love. And every time we're let down, and every time someone abandons us or harms us or doesn't love us the way that we want to be loved, we internalize it as something I did wrong and a thing I need to change about myself. Or we're looking for that perfect thing, we're looking for that perfect love, and then anytime someone lets us down, anytime someone shows a human flaw, we're like, well, fuck you, you're out. And that comes, again, from these deep-seated insecurities we have in ourselves that, again, are a natural, normal human part of the human experience. I'm going to go anti-guru on you and say, there is no getting to a place where you feel perfectly secure and perfectly like you're never going to get harmed and you're never going to be hurt and everything is going to be fine so long as you're alive. We are never going to get rid of the existential reality of being vulnerable humans who can be hurt by a lot of things and who die and don't know why and don't know what happens afterwards. Nothing is ever going to get rid of that. Unless, by some scientific medical marvel, we discover the roots of consciousness and we can prove definitively what happens after we die. We are always going to live with the existential reality of being alive and suffering and dying and not knowing why or where or what happens. And there's no relationship that's ever going to fulfill us enough that gets rid of that fear, that gets rid of that existential reality. We're never going to perfect ourselves enough that we are loved by someone enough that we feel perfectly safe. We are never going to find the perfect thing, the perfect person, the perfect guru, the perfect teaching that makes us feel completely safe and like we're not vulnerable. And as soon as we can really wrap our minds around that, we are never going to get rid of our vulnerability. We're never going to get rid of our vulnerability within relationship, and we're never going to get rid of our vulnerability within the human experience. That's when I think self-love starts to become a thing we really understand what we're doing. We're showing up for ourselves as we navigate the complexity of this life. We're no longer looking for the perfect solution. We're no longer looking for the transcendence. We're no longer looking for the relationship to fix it all. We're not trying to manipulate ourselves to be perfectly loved, because we can understand, okay, I'm going to be able to get my needs met to the best of my ability. I'm going to have times on this planet where I feel so connected and I feel amazing and everything is great and flowing and all my needs are met and everything's awesome. And there are going to be times in my life where shit happens and we don't have that stuff and it doesn't feel good and we feel very vulnerable. And being a spiritual human, if we want to put it that way, in my opinion, is learning how to work with that. How do we show up for ourselves within that? How do we grieve that when we need to grieve it? How do we let ourselves be scared when we need to be scared? And then how do we move forward in whatever way we can based on the circumstances that exist within our relationships, outside of our relationships? Self-love is about helping ourselves manage the existential reality of being alive. And that's going to help us manage our relationships in the big zoomed out way, where we start to see where our codependencies and all these things are coming from, our desire to be perfectly loved so that we will be perfectly safe. And then we can zoom way in and say, okay, what do I have the bandwidth for right now? Who am I really? What do I really want? What is important to me? What is not important to me? And how do I start to navigate that within my relationships with the other people that are always going to be a part of my life, who are always going to have the ability to hurt me and to let me down, and to understand that becoming ultra independent doesn't protect you from that. We take as much responsibility for ourselves as we can, and then we learn to be there for ourselves when we are inevitably let down by others. We be there for ourselves where we can, and we learn to communicate where things need to change. We learn to be here for ourselves, and we learn how to set boundaries and how to say no and how to be okay with when other people can't meet our needs and how to exit situations. The self-love path is about helping us understand where we're coming from so that we can better meet our needs within relationships. And then the last thing I want to say is that the more self-loving we are, the more we can validate our own experiences, the more we can validate our own feelings, the more we can understand our own motivations and our own perspectives, and we can kind of break out of the idea that that is what everyone is feeling and everyone is experiencing and the assumed, the more we can connect with other people on a real level. The more we can start to say, like, I'm not here to figure out how to get you to meet my need. I'm here because I like you. And I want to know about you. And I want to know about your perspective. And I want to know what matters to you. And it's not always around this, are you meeting my need or not? Right? We can take connection to a much deeper level when we don't feel so invalidated and so afraid and like we need the love of others to be okay. Like that's basically where codependence comes from. Is I need the love of others in order to be okay, and therefore I will do whatever I need to do to get that love. The more we can love ourselves and the more we can see that we can meet our own needs and come into the reality that we're a little bit more autonomous a lot of the time than we think that we are, the more we're going to be able to understand what a healthy dynamic is and isn't, and the more we're going to be able to show up for the people in our lives with a little bit more of a clear head, right? The more we're actually going to be able to be present in our relationships with other people without the underlying constantly looking for how they're going to support you, or how we can come into this like poles thing so that we can both be happy all the time. It's like, okay, well, how are you showing up today? How are you, because, right, like, my husband is not the same every single day. His masculine and feminine energies are not the same every single day. Neither are mine. So to say, like, you need to do this and I need to do that and that's how we balance our relationship, it's too simplistic. Because it's not true to who he is and it's not true to who I am and who we are on a daily basis. But the more he can show up for himself and the more I can show up for myself, when there's crunch, when there's things that don't align, when there's struggle, the clearer we both are on where we're coming from, and the more we can be less, I need you to understand me, and if you don't, I'm going to fall apart. The better time we have communicating what's going on, and the better time we have in reaching compromise. That's usually how that works. We're just a little bit less afraid, we're a little bit more able to hear each other, and then we're able to meet the circumstances that actually exist in that moment. Yeah? So think of them like two separate needs. Self-love is like your hunger need, and other love is like your need for hydration. They are not meant to substitute each other. They enhance one another. They play into one another. They're deeply connected. But one is never going to get rid of the other. And the more we can understand ourselves and the more we can understand what we need and what we want and how we're feeling, and the more emotionally intelligent we become and the more we become capable of expressing ourselves and all of this, the easier relationships are going to be. And the more we can become a little bit independent in the sense of learning to love ourselves whether someone else loves us or not, the better capacity we're going to have to actually be in loving relationships, because it will mean that we can have a little bit more vulnerability. Because a lot of the time, the best kinds of like romantic friendship relationships are the ones where there's lots of vulnerability and you're really showing up as your full self, which means you're really at risk of being rejected and let down. That dynamic is always going to be a part of it. So when you know that you can show up for yourself, when you know that you can be there for you, when you know that you can validate yourself, you're going to have an easier time being vulnerable with the people who are safe to be vulnerable with, who actually deserve your vulnerability. And the better those relationships are going to be, because you're less in need of them loving you and you trying to show up for how they want you to be so that they will love you. Which again is like that snake eating his own tail. It's like the more you don't show up as your real self, the less you're going to feel loved. But the more you're showing up as someone they want you to be, the more you're doing it to try to be loved. But again, they're loving you for someone that you aren't. So therefore, you're not going to feel like that love. And then you just keep doing that over and over. The more we can just say, this is who I actually am. Do you love that? And we can be okay if they don't. And then again, understanding that sometimes we need other people in ways that we don't want to. And that's a part of this. And learning to love yourself within that circumstance and not blame yourself for it, and understand that if you feel afraid and you feel vulnerable, that that's normal, because of course some of us, we're not as independent as we want to be, and that's okay. And then understanding that when you really want to be independent and guard your heart, and that too, we got to have compassion for that. We got to love those parts of ourselves who are afraid of being vulnerable, who are afraid of being let down. When we want a scorched earth when someone lets us down, that's the process of healing ourselves, right? And sometimes it is true. Sometimes that person doesn't deserve your love anymore. Sometimes that person doesn't deserve your trust anymore. Sometimes it was just a human mistake and a human thing or a shitty behavior, and we can work on it. And again, that's up to you to determine for yourself based on what you can and cannot handle and what you do and do not want. No one can tell you how you should be doing relationships. That's up to you to decide. You're an adult. All right? Okay. So that's that for today. Relationships are like one of the most popular requests. So if you liked this, let me know. You want more talks on relationships, let me know. And I can do that. And other than that, have a great day, night, week, month, year, whenever I see you next. And you're awesome.